Welcome back to Maggie Stories. What would you do when you're minding your business, running the finest stall and the most handsome man in the city keeps coming back and his crush starts plotting against you?
The day Park Seo-joon walked into Mangwon Market, he was not supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in a boardroom on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Uido, sitting across from three terrified men who owed his family money and had the audacity to think a delay was acceptable. He was supposed to be cold, composed, the kind of man who said very little and meant everything. He was supposed to be Park Seo-joon, heir to the Park Syndicate, the man Seoul's underworld referred to in hushed tones and averted eyes, the man who had never once in 31 years been described as flustered. He was not supposed to be standing in the middle of a traditional market, frozen in place, because a woman in a red apron and matching red kitten heels had just looked a grown man dead in the face and told him, in the most unbothered tone imaginable, that his pork selection was basic, broke, and spiritually defeated. Seo-joon blinked. The man she was addressing, a regular customer, clearly, because he was taking the insult with the practiced resignation of someone who had been through this before, just laughed and handed over his money. She slapped the wrapped cuts onto the counter with a satisfaction that was almost theatrical, wiped her hands on her apron like a surgeon finishing a procedure, and turned to her next customer with the kind of smile that could genuinely make a person forget what they came to say. Seo-joon had walked into the market on instinct. His driver had taken a wrong route, the boardroom meeting had been pushed by 40 minutes, and he'd stepped out of the car into the noise and color of Mangwon on a Tuesday morning just to breathe something other than recycled air. He had not planned to stop walking. He had certainly not planned to end up at stall 14, reading a handwritten chalkboard sign that said, Gomer's Cuts, finest pork in Seoul. Don't argue with me about the price. You will lose. He read the sign twice. Then he looked at the woman behind the counter. She was magnificent. There was no other word for it, and he wasn't a man given to dramatic vocabulary. She was tall, dark-skinned, built like someone who had never once apologized for taking up space, and she was dressed like the market stall was her personal runway. The red apron was pristine, not a smudge out of place, cinched over a cream blouse with the kind of detail at the collar that said intentional. Her heels were a deep cherry red, low enough to work in, high enough to matter. Her counter gleamed. Her knives were arranged with surgical precision on a magnetic strip along the back wall. The cuts in the display case were dressed like they were going to an event. Everything about her station said, I take this seriously. Don't mistake that for desperation. Seo-joon moved closer, which he immediately recognized as something he was doing without deciding to. She noticed him the way she noticed everything, quickly, efficiently, with zero performance. Her eyes swept him once. The coat, the watch, the posture, the very specific kind of stillness that powerful men carried in their bodies whether they meant to or not. She clocked all of it in about 2 seconds and returned her attention to rewrapping a display piece as if he were furniture. You're either lost, she said, not looking up, or you want pork. What if I'm just looking? This isn't a museum. She still didn't look up. The art is in the flavor, not the presentation. You want to experience it, you have to buy something. Someone nearby laughed. Seo-joon realized there was a small, loose audience. A neighboring stall vendor pretending to organize dried goods. 2 Halmionis who had stopped mid-shuffle. A younger woman 3 stalls down who had abandoned all pretense and was openly watching. Apparently this was entertainment. Apparently this was just Tuesday. He stepped up to the counter. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She had the kind of face that was interesting before it was anything else. Expressive in a way that felt genuine rather than performed, eyes that were sharp and warm at the same time, which shouldn't have been possible but somehow was. She looked at him like she was calculating something, and whatever the math came out to, she was not impressed in the way people usually weren't impressed with him, which was to say, nobody looked at Park Seo-joon and failed to register danger. But she registered it and filed it somewhere low priority, which was so unusual it was almost offensive. You've never been here before, she said. It wasn't a question. First time. She reached under the counter and set a small tasting portion on a paper plate. A thin slice of marinated pork that had obviously been prepared earlier, the smell of it reaching him before it landed. Try that before you waste either of our time. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. You feed strangers? I convert them, she said simply. There's a difference. He picked up the slice. He ate it. He didn't say anything for 3 full seconds, which was longer than it sounds when someone is watching you that carefully. That's, he started. Yeah, she said. How do you? Family recipe, trade secret, not for sale, don't ask. She was already pulling a fresh cut from the case. How much do you want? He bought more pork than he had any logical use for. He was aware of this. He bought it anyway. What Seo-jun did not do was tell anyone where he'd been. He returned to his car, handed 3 bags of exceptionally packaged pork to his bewildered driver, and sat in silence for the entire ride to Uedo thinking about the way she'd said, I convert them, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was back on Thursday. This time she saw him coming. He could tell because the corner of her mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't nothing either. She didn't greet him. She let him come all the way to the counter and stand there like a man waiting to be acknowledged. You came back, she finally said. The pork was good. Obviously. She tilted her head slightly. You don't look like a market person. What does a market person look like? She looked him over with the casual precision of a woman who had been reading people in public spaces her entire life. Comfortable, she said. You look like a man who's used to things being brought to him. Being here. She gestured at the organized chaos of the market around them. The noise, the proximity, the humanity of it all. You're choosing it, which means either you're running from something quiet, or you found something loud that you like. He opened his mouth and closed it. She smirked. The first real one. I'll get your order. By the 3rd visit, the market had noticed. Not loudly. Nothing in Mangwon happened quietly for long. But there was a specific market rhythm to gossip, and Gomer's stall had become a minor observatory. Auntie Shin from the vegetable stall 3 spots down had already assembled a working theory. The fish vendor's wife had mentioned it to her husband, who had mentioned it to everyone. Even the parking attendant at the back entrance had strong opinions. Gomer herself was not entertaining any of it. He's a customer, she said to Auntie Shin, who had materialized beside her counter with the very specific energy of a woman who had not come to buy anything. He came 3 times this week. People like good pork. Gomer SSI. Auntie Shin placed a hand on the counter. I have been selling vegetables for 22 years. I know what it looks like when a man comes for the pork and what it looks like when the pork is an excuse. Gomer pointed a knife, casually with no menace, just for emphasis. Go sell your vegetables, Auntie. Auntie Shin retreated, but she retreated smiling, which was somehow worse. What Gomer would not say out loud, not to Auntie Shin, not to anyone, was that he made her laugh. Not on purpose. Not with jokes or charm or any of the deliberate weaponry that attractive men deployed when they decided they wanted something. He made her laugh because he was clearly a man who operated in a world where people arranged themselves around him, and the market kept refusing to do that, and his face every time it happened was genuinely, helplessly funny. The day a delivery cart clipped him on the way past and he had to step sideways into a stack of radishes. The time Auntie Shin's cat, a large, opinionated animal named Dunjang, walked across the top of his expensive coat where he'd folded it over the counter railing. The moment he tried to ask a question about her sourcing practices and got interrupted 4 times by other customers and just stood there holding his thoughts with nowhere to put them. She laughed every time. Real laughter. Not polite, not performed. The kind that came up from somewhere and arrived before she could decide whether to let it out. And every time it happened, he looked at her like she had done something extraordinary, which was its own problem entirely because she knew what it meant when a man looked at you like you had done something extraordinary just by being yourself. She had been that for someone before. She wasn't interested in being it again. His name came to her by accident. One of the other vendors, young man, newer to the market, the type who watched too much and talked too much, leaned over to her between customers one afternoon and said very quietly, "You know who that is, right? The one who keeps coming." "A customer," she said. "Park Seo-jun." A pause, waited with meaning she didn't immediately pick up. "Park family." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What family?" He looked at her with the specific expression of a person realizing they were going to have to say something inconvenient. "The kind of family," he said carefully, "that makes problems go away." She set down her knife very slowly, turned to look at the man currently standing at a slight distance from her counter. examining a handwritten menu of her weekly specials with the focused attention of someone studying a document. Of course, she thought. Of course, the man with the posture and the coat and the way he stood like the air around him was obligated to cooperate. Of course he was that kind of man. She picked her knife back up. When he came to the counter, she gave him his usual order, took his money, and then said very casually, while tying the bag, "I heard your name today." He went still. Park Seo-jun. She didn't make it a question. She also didn't look up from the bag. A beat. And nothing. She handed him the bag. Met his eyes. "I just like knowing what kind of customer I have. Different kinds of people, different kinds of transactions. You understand." He looked at her for a long moment. "What kind of customer am I?" She smiled, the real one, the corner one, the one that meant she'd already figured out the answer and found it more amusing than concerning. "A regular," she said. "Same as anyone else." Something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just shifted. He took the bag. "Same time Friday?" he said. "I'm here every day," she said. "Don't be special about it." He left. Auntie Shin materialized like a spirit from between two stalls of hanging garlic. Gomer pointed at her before she could open her mouth. "Vegetables," Gomer said. Auntie Shin retreated. Again smiling, again worse. The disruption arrived on a Thursday, dressed in head-to-toe cream Chanel, on kitten heels that were entirely wrong for the cobblestones of Mangwon Market, with the energy of someone who had arrived at a location specifically to be witnessed arriving. Her name was Cha Yuri. She was, by any standard assessment, extraordinarily beautiful. The kind of beautiful that came with infrastructure, the right family, the right clinics, the right stylists, the right belief, instilled from childhood, that the world was a mirror and it owed you a flattering reflection. She had the posture of a woman who expected doors to open before she reached them. She had the smile of a woman who had never once had to be funny. She had also clearly followed Park Seo-jun here. He saw her first. Gomer caught the exact moment it happened. She had good peripheral vision and had been peripherally tracking him since he arrived. The way she tracked anything that entered her space, it was just good spatial awareness, it meant nothing, and she saw his posture change. The small, controlled tightening of a man who has been found doing something he hadn't announced. Cha Yuri walked through the market like it was a film set and she was the main character. Several people genuinely stopped to look at her. She was that put together. Gomer gave her exactly 2 seconds of evaluation, took in the outfit, the heels, the energy, the direction of her gaze, and returned to her work. Yuri's gaze landed on Seo-jun, then tracked to where he was standing, then landed on the stall, then landed on Gomer. Something crossed her face. Quick, controlled, then smoothed back into porcelain composure. She walked over, stopped beside Seo-jun with the practiced ease of a woman claiming territory through proximity. "Seo-jun SSI," she said, the tone doing 15 things simultaneously. Warm, proprietary, slightly wounded at the edges, designed to be heard. "Yuri SSI. His tone did none of those things. "What are you doing here?" "I was nearby," she said, which was so obviously untrue that Gomer, not looking up from her current task of breaking down a rack with the clean, efficient movements of someone who had been doing it since before this woman was probably wearing heels, felt the corner of her mouth move. "My mother's birthday dinner is next week," Yuri continued, pivoting smoothly, "and I heard this market has good quality product." She looked at the stall. "This is it. This is it," Seo-jun said. Yuri looked at the display case the way a person looks at something they have decided in advance not to be impressed by. She looked at the chalkboard sign. She looked at Gomer, taking her time about it the way people do when they want you to feel examined. Gomer finished what she was doing, set down her tool, and looked directly at Cha Yuri with the particular calm of a woman who had been examined by better and unbothered by all of them. "Can I help you?" she said, perfectly pleasant, perfectly neutral. The tone of a professional who would extend courtesy exactly as far as it was warranted and not 1 centimeter further. Yuri smiled, the kind that meant something else. "I'm looking for quality." "Then you're in the right place," Gomer said. "This is the best pork in Mangwon. If you want something for a formal dinner, I'd suggest the—" "Is it really the best?" Yuri said, lightly, tilting her head. "Or just the best here?" The market went approximately 10% quieter. Auntie Shin's hand stopped mid-arrangement on her vegetable display. Gomer looked at Cha Yuri for a moment, looked at the stall, looked back at Yuri. "Baby," she said, her voice warm and sweet as the front end of a thunderstorm. "You're standing in front of a display case that supplies 4 restaurants and 2 private clubs in this city. My waiting list for custom-cut orders is 3 weeks long. I have a regular who takes a 20-minute detour from wherever rich people come from." A brief, amiable glance at Seo-jun. "Just to shop here. So when you walk into my office," she spread one hand, gesturing at the impeccably maintained stall around her, "and ask me if it's really the best, I need you to understand that the question is cute, but the answer is yes." Dead silence. Then Auntie Shin laughed first, which opened the door for everyone else, and the market noise came rushing back in like a tide. Cha Yuri's smile stayed perfectly in place, but her eyes said something entirely different, and Gomer saw it, filed it, understood it, and quietly did not like what it meant. She looked at Seo-jun. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize, which was irritating, because she could usually categorize everything. "Your usual?" she said to him. "Please," he said. She got his order. She did not look at Cha Yuri again, but she felt the woman's gaze on her back the entire time, sharp and measuring, and she thought, "This is somebody else's story. Don't let it become yours." She would think about that thought later, about how sometimes the thing you tell yourself not to step in is exactly where the path leads. The thing about Cha Yuri was that she had never, not once in her 28 years of living, lost anything she decided she wanted. This was not an exaggeration. It was a documented pattern. She had wanted the lead in her university's annual showcase. She got it. She had wanted the penthouse unit in the Hanamdong building that had a 6-month waitlist. Her father made a call, and she moved in by the end of the week. She had wanted the Chanel campaign that 17 other women had auditioned for. She got it, and they named the colorway after her, which was perhaps overkill but felt appropriate at the time. She had wanted Park Seo-jun for 2 years. She had not gotten him yet, which was, by her own historical accounting, statistically bizarre and personally offensive. It wasn't that he was rude to her. He was never rude. He was worse than rude, he was polite. The specific brand of polite that powerful men deployed when they wanted to keep something at arm's length without causing a scene. He came to her family's events when the social calendar demanded it. He sat beside her at dinners when their mothers arranged it. He answered her messages, not immediately, but he answered them, with the energy of a man completing an administrative task. She had been patient. She had been strategic. She had been, by any reasonable standard, absolutely stunning at every single one of these encounters, and none of it had moved him past polite. And then she followed him to a market on a Thursday and found him standing at a pork stall laughing. Not the small, controlled social laugh she had heard from him at every dinner and event over 2 years. A real one, surprised out of him, the kind that changed the shape of his whole face, because the woman behind the counter had said something that Yuri arrived too late to catch but clearly didn't need to, because the evidence of its impact was right there in front of her. Cha Yuri was a lot of things. Perceptive was one of them. She saw it in 3 seconds flat and spent the entire drive home rearranging her strategy. The first thing she did was research. Her assistant, a meticulous, slightly terrified woman named Jaiwin who had learned very early that her job was to produce information, not opinions, had a full profile on stall 14, Mangwon Market by the following morning. Gomer. No family name offered publicly. Black, American-raised, had been in Korea for 6 years. Fluent in Korean, conversational at first, then apparently somewhere between impressive and embarrassing for native speakers, depending on who you asked, had worked her way up from a market assistant position to purchasing her own stall license 3 years ago. Turned it profitable in 8 months. Currently supplied pork cuts to at minimum 4 restaurants, 2 private dining clubs, and a rotating list of individual clients who were, by several accounts, loyal to the point of inconvenience. Jaiwin had also, without being asked, included a note that read, "She is apparently very funny and people like her a lot." And then, because Jaiwin was occasionally brave in small, deniable ways, a second note. Multiple sources described her as undefeatable in an argument. Yuri put the tablet down. She picked it back up. She read undefeatable in an argument again. She put it back down. "Find out," she said to Jaiwin. who her suppliers are, and whether her stall license has any outstanding reviews. Jaiwan wrote this down with the expression of someone who understood they were now involved in something they did not want to be involved in. The second thing Yuri did was show up at the market again. Not immediately, that would have been obvious. She waited 11 days, which she calculated as long enough to seem coincidental and short enough to matter. She came on a Wednesday this time, dressed down by her own standards, which still meant tailored wide-leg trousers, a silk blouse in pale gold, and earrings. She bought vegetables from the stall across the way, which she did not want and would not eat, because it gave her a reason to stand in the general vicinity and observe. Gomer was in the middle of what appeared to be a full courtroom proceeding with a middle-aged man who was disputing the price of a particular cut. "I got it for less last month," the man was saying. "You did," Gomer agreed pleasantly. "Because last month I was running a promotional price for new customers. You are no longer a new customer. You are, in fact, a very established customer, which means you have personally confirmed that this product is worth the full price. Congratulations on your loyalty. That'll be 32,001. The man stared at her. "That's not. You can't just. Sir." She tilted her head. "You've been coming here for 4 months. In those 4 months, have I once given you a bad cut?" A pause. "No." "Has your family complained?" Longer pause. "No." "Did your mother-in-law, at your anniversary dinner, specifically ask where the pork came from?" The man looked pained. "She did." 32,001, Gomer repeated, same pleasant tone, same immovable energy. "I also accept card." He paid. He left. He was smiling by the time he hit the end of the row, which was the most impressive part, the way she sent people away feeling like they'd won something even when they clearly hadn't. Yuri watched this with an expression she was careful to keep neutral. Then Gomer looked up and saw her. "A beat." "Back again," Gomer said. "Not unfriendly. Not particularly friendly either. Just accurate." "I told you," Yuri said, moving toward the counter with the practiced ease of a woman who never let herself look like she was trying. "My mother's birthday dinner. That's next week," Gomer said. "You told me last time." Yuri smiled. "I like to plan ahead. Gomer was already half-turned toward the display case. "What is your mother like?" And this was the thing that Yuri had not prepared for, which was the fundamental problem with Gomer as an obstacle. She didn't perform. There was no competition happening on her end. She wasn't posturing or positioning or doing any of the things that Yuri's entire social world ran on. She was just working, asking a reasonable question, treating Yuri like a customer, which was somehow the most disorienting thing anyone had done to her in recent memory. "Something impressive," Yuri said, recovering. "She has refined taste." "Everybody's mother has refined taste," Gomer said, pulling out a tray. "Tell me something specific. Does she prefer lean cuts or does she like some fat for flavor? Is this a formal table setting or a family-style dinner? How many guests?" Yuri answered the questions. She had not expected to answer questions. She had come with a vague plan involving observation and subtle undermining and possibly leaving Gomer feeling some type of way, and instead she was having a genuine consultation about pork-fat ratios, which was not where she'd seen this going. She left 20 minutes later with a custom order placed for the following Thursday and absolutely nothing accomplished. In the car, she called her friend Suyin. "She's good," Yuri said without preamble. Suyin, who had been briefed on the situation and had privately thought the whole thing was a terrible idea from the start, said nothing, which was the wisest available option. "I need a different approach," Yuri said. "Yuria," Suyin said carefully. "Siajanesasai hasn't even... has anything actually happened between them? Maybe you're..." "He laughed," Yuri said. "You don't understand." He laughed. Suyin understood. She had also never seen Park Seo-joon laugh, and she had known him for 4 years through various overlapping social circles. She kept this observation to herself as well. "I'll think of something," Yuri said. This, Suyin thought, was exactly what she was afraid of. Meanwhile, entirely unaware that she was the subject of a campaign, Gomer was having a perfectly good week. Seo-joon had come in on Monday, Wednesday, and was apparently planning a Friday visit based on the way he'd said, "See you Friday" on Wednesday with the confidence of a man who had decided something. She had not confirmed this. She had also not denied it. She had handed him his bag and told him the heels she was wearing that day, deep forest green, very good decision, were not available for public commentary. After he'd looked at them for approximately 1 second too long, he'd said, "I didn't say anything." She'd said, "Your face said something." He'd said nothing, which meant his face had in fact said something. The market had, at this point, fully adopted Seojun's visits as a communal event. Auntie Shin had developed a warning system that involved absolutely no subtlety. She simply called out, "Gomer SSI, your customer is here," regardless of whether Gomer had asked, every single time, from approximately 40 meters away. The fish vendor's wife had begun timing her break to coincide with his arrival. The young man who ran the Tiok stall at the far end had once offered Seojun a free sample on his way past, which nobody had asked him to do but which the whole market somehow felt was appropriate. Seojun took all of this with the particular expression of a man who was being anthropologically studied and had decided, at some point, to find it more interesting than irritating. "Your market," he said to Gomer one afternoon, leaning against the counter in a way that would have looked casual on anyone else and on him just looked like a man who had decided to stop performing uprightness for 10 minutes, "is a whole ecosystem." "It's a community," she corrected, wrapping in order. "There's a difference. An ecosystem has predators. A community has Auntie Shin." "What's the difference?" "Auntie Shin feeds you before she asks your business." She tied the bag. "Predators skip the first step." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Which one am I?" She looked at him. The question was light, but the underneath of it wasn't, and they both knew it, and the fact that they both knew it and were standing here anyway said something that Gomer was actively choosing not to examine too closely. "You buy a lot of pork for someone who lives alone," she said instead. He blinked. "How do you know I live alone?" "Because you never once mentioned cooking it for anyone. Just yourself every time. A man buying for a family talks about the family. A man buying for a woman talks about the woman whether he means to or not." She leaned on the counter briefly. "You just talk about the pork. A beat." "I've started giving some to my driver," he said. "That's sad." "He's very grateful." "That's sadder." She pushed off the counter and went back to her work. "I'll add some extra pieces Friday. Your driver deserves better." He laughed. Short, genuine, caught off guard. Auntie Shin, from across the way, made a sound that was not appropriate for a public market. Gomer pointed at her without turning around. Vegetables. The plan Yuri eventually landed on was not her most sophisticated. She would reflect on this later. But she had been raised in a world where the application of social pressure through the right channels could reshape almost any situation, and she had identified what she believed was the relevant channel. The Market Stall Licensing Board met quarterly. Complaints could be submitted by any member of the public regarding hygiene standards, noise violations, or zoning irregularities. Yuri didn't file anything herself. She was too smart for that, too practiced in the particular art of keeping her hands clean while the work got done. She mentioned very casually, at a dinner attended by a city official she'd known since childhood, that she'd visited a particular market stall and had some questions about the sourcing transparency. She didn't say anything directly actionable. She never did. She just planted the question and let bureaucracy do what bureaucracy does, which is move slowly and make people's lives difficult in ways that were hard to trace back to any specific origin. 3 days later, Gomer received a formal notice of a compliance review scheduled for the following month. Gomer read the letter twice. She set it down on the counter. She picked it up and read it a third time, because she believed in giving official documents the courtesy of full attention before deciding how to feel about them. Then she set it down again and felt about it. She was meticulous. She was licensed. Her sourcing documentation was organized in a binder that she updated quarterly because she believed in being unfightable on paper as much as in person. She had nothing to hide and she knew it. But she also knew that compliance reviews took time and energy and created the kind of uncertainty that made loyal customers nervous and made newer customers reconsider, and that whoever had initiated this had known that. She thought about Cha Yuri in her pale gold silk blouse, asking careful questions about her mother's preferences, and the thing she'd seen in the woman's eyes at that first encounter, sharp and measuring. She thought about Park Seo-jun and his expensive coat and his genuine laugh and the fact that he came to her market 3 times a week and she had not asked him a single direct question about what that meant because she already knew the answer and knowing was enough of a problem. She put the letter in her binder. in its own labeled section. She went back to work. If someone wanted to come at her, they were welcome to. She had been unfightable her whole life. She wasn't about to change the policy on account of a woman who wore the wrong heels for cobblestones. Seo Jun found out about the compliance review before Gomer said anything to him, which meant someone in his orbit had been watching, which meant things were already further along than she'd realized. He came in on Friday. He didn't bring it up immediately. He ordered his usual, accepted the extra portions she'd packed for his driver, and then stood there a moment longer than the transaction required. "I heard you got a notice," he said. She looked up slowly. "From? Does it matter?" "It matters," she said. "Because if you have people watching my market, that's a conversation we need to have. And if you don't and it just reached you anyway, that's a different conversation." A pause. "The second one." She nodded. "Filed it. Then someone in your circle sent it." He said nothing, which was confirmation enough. She looked at him for a long moment. Read his face. The controlled, careful frustration of a man who had connected the same dots she had and did not like where they led. "I don't need you to fix it," she said. "I know. I'm serious. I have documentation going back 3 years. Let it run its course." "Gomer." "I said I don't need you to fix it." Her voice was even. Not cold, she wasn't cold, but load-bearing in the way that certain statements were. "Because if you fix it, then I owe you something, and if I owe you something, then this." She gestured briefly at the space between them, at the whole complicated architecture of whatever this was becoming, changes shape. "And I like the current shape." He looked at her. "What shape is that?" "Regular customer," she said. "Same as anyone else." The same words she'd used weeks ago. But this time they both knew they didn't fit anymore, and she was offering them anyway, like a door he could choose to walk through. He picked up his bag. "Friday," he said. "I'm here every day," she said. He left. She watched him go, briefly, professionally, the way she watched all her customers leave. Auntie Shin was already moving toward her in the peripheral vision, and she already had one hand up. "I know," Auntie Shin said preemptively. "Vegetables." "You're learning," Gomer said, but she was smiling. Privately, the kind that she kept for her own accounting. Outside, the market moved and breathed and hollered around her stall like it always did. Her display case gleamed. Her knives were in their right places. Her paperwork was in order. Cha Yuri wanted a problem. Gomer had been solving problems before that woman learned to walk in heels. Let her come. The compliance review came on a Tuesday, which was Gomer's second busiest day, which she suspected was not a coincidence. 2 officials arrived at 9:45 in the morning with clipboards and the specific energy of people who had been told to find something and were hoping they wouldn't have to work too hard to find it. Gomer met them at the entrance to her stall with her binder already open to the first relevant section, her sourcing documentation tabbed and color-coded, her hygiene certificates in a clear sleeve at the front, and the expression of a woman who had been ready for this since the moment the letter arrived. The officials looked at the binder, then at each other. "Your supplier records." The first one started. She turned to the tab. The records went back 38 months, cross-referenced by supplier, delivery date, batch number, and quality grade. The most recent entry was from 2 days ago. He wrote something down. She couldn't tell if it was impressed or administrative. The second official did a walkthrough of the stall, the surfaces, the storage, the temperature log she kept for the display case, the cleaning schedule she had mounted on a laminated card inside the back cabinet because she believed that systems should be visible and followed and not kept in someone's head where they could be conveniently forgotten. The walkthrough took 14 minutes. At the end of it, the second official said, "Everything appears to be in order." "Yes," Gomer said pleasantly. "It is." The first one looked up from his clipboard. "We'll submit our report within the standard time frame. You should receive confirmation within 10 business days," she said. "I read the notice thoroughly." They left. Auntie Shin, who had been performing the most elaborate and unconvincing display of vegetable organization in the history of the market for the entire 40-minute duration, abandoned it the moment the officials rounded the corner and appeared at Gomer's counter. With the speed of a woman who had been waiting. "Well?" she said. "Fine," Gomer said, closing her binder. "They found nothing?" "There was nothing to find." Auntie Shin exhaled. A long, relieved sound that communicated exactly how much the entire market had been collectively holding its breath. Good, good. We were worried. I wasn't, Gomer said. This was true. What she was. And she would not say this to Auntie Shin or to anyone because it was the kind of thing that only made sense inside your own chest. Was tired. Not of the market. Not of the work. Tired of the specific tax that came with being unbothered in a world that kept sending things designed to bother you and then waiting to see if this would be the one that finally worked. She put the binder under the counter. She straightened her apron, burgundy today with heels to match because she had worn burgundy to the compliance review on purpose, because she believed your clothes should tell the story of a woman who already knew how the meeting was going to end. She went back to work. Seo Jun came in at noon. He looked at her face first. Not her stall, not the display case, not the chalkboard. Her face. The way someone looks when they're checking a reading on something they've been tracking. They came this morning, she said, before he could ask. I know. Pause. I heard. Then you know it was fine. I know it was fine. He came to the counter. He wasn't wearing the coat today, just a dark shirt, collar open, which was such a minor deviation from his usual presentation that it probably meant nothing. Except that on him it read like a man who had left the house thinking about something other than how he looked, which was somehow more intimate than the coat had ever been. Gomer. Don't, she said. I haven't said anything. You're about to say something that starts with an apology for something you didn't technically do, and then transitions into an offer to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I'm telling you now, don't. He closed his mouth. It was handled, she said. My documentation handled it. Not you. That matters. Why does it matter? She looked at him directly. Straight on, the way she did when she wanted there to be no ambiguity about what she was communicating. Because I have been taking care of myself in this city for 6 years. By myself. I built this stall, I built this customer base, I built this reputation, every single piece of it without anyone's name behind me. And it works. It runs clean and it runs right, and when someone tries to come at it, it defends itself because I built it to. She held his gaze. If you step in and handle my problems, all of that becomes conditional. It becomes yours a little bit. And it's not yours. The market moved around them. Someone called out a price. Auntie Shin's cartwheels made their familiar complaint against the cobblestone. The smell of the fish stall drifted past. All of it normal and alive and ongoing, and the two of them standing in it having a conversation that had very little to do with pork and both of them aware of that. I understand, he said finally. Do you? You're telling me the shape of what you'll allow. I'm telling you the shape of who I am, she said. Those aren't always the same thing, but in this case they happen to be. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who was filing something away carefully, treating it with the respect of information that mattered. Your usual? She said. Please. She made his order. He paid. He didn't leave immediately, which had become a pattern she had stopped pretending not to notice. The heels, he said eventually. What about them? Burgundy was a very specific choice for a compliance review. She looked up. He was looking at the heels with the expression of a man who had figured something out and found it funnier than he was going to directly admit. My shoes, she said, are not a subject open for public analysis. You match them to your apron every day. Allegedly. It's not allegedly, it's... He gestured at the obvious, living evidence. Seo Jun. She tied his bag. What I wear to my office is my business. You are a customer in my office. Act accordingly. You call it your office. It is my office. Most people call it a stall. Most people, she said, sliding the bag across the counter, are not me. He picked up the bag. He was smiling, the real kind, the one that changed the architecture of his whole face, and she was looking at her counter with great focus because she had decided some time ago that watching him smile was information she didn't need more of. Friday, he said. Every day, she said. He left. She lasted approximately 4 seconds before Auntie Shin arrived. He looked at your shoes, Auntie Shin said. He looked at my shoes as a customer noticing the aesthetic consistency of my brand. He looked at your shoes? Auntie Shin repeated, in the tone of a woman delivering a verdict. The way my late husband looked at my hands when we were courting, like they were the most interesting thing he'd ever had the privilege of seeing. Gomer stared at her counter for a moment. Go sell something, she said. Auntie Shin went, smiling. As always, Cha Yuri received the report that the compliance review had found nothing on a Thursday afternoon and had what Jaiwon would later describe, in the privacy of her own diary, as a moment. It wasn't a tantrum. Yuri didn't do tantrums, they were messy and they left evidence. It was more of a sustained, pressurized silence during which she stood at the window of her Hanamdong penthouse looking at the Han River and completely restructuring her understanding of the situation. She had underestimated the woman. This was uncomfortable to acknowledge, but she was capable of acknowledging uncomfortable things. When it was strategically useful, and it was useful now because underestimating her again would be worse. The documentation thing was actually, and she hated this, impressive. You didn't survive a compliance review that cleanly by accident. You survived it by being a person who anticipated problems and prepared for them before they arrived. That was a specific kind of discipline. The kind that Yuri, who had people to handle her problems, had never needed to develop personally. She poured herself something cold and thought. The indirect approach had failed. The official channel had failed. She needed to be direct, which she had been avoiding because direct confrontation was a lower-class move. It was graceless. It was the kind of thing people did when they had no other options. But here she was, having exhausted her other options, standing at a window in a penthouse that cost more than most people earned in a decade, about to consider going to a market and starting a fight with a butcher. The humiliation of it almost made her laugh. Almost. She called her driver instead. She came on a Saturday. Saturday was Gomer's busiest day. The market was at full volume. Families, couples, the Saturday regulars who had been coming for years, the newer customers who'd found the stall through word of mouth or through those restaurant menus that listed their suppliers. The noise was wonderful. The energy was exactly what Gomer had moved to Korea for, or at least part of it, this specific texture of public life, the way a market felt like a living thing rather than a transaction. She was in the middle of serving 3 customers simultaneously, the practice choreography of a woman who had built her workflow to handle exactly this, when she felt the shift in the air near her stall. Not Seojin's shift. She knew his. This was different. She looked up. Cha Yuri. No pale gold blouse today. No careful casual presentation. Full armor black dress, structured. Heels that were absolutely still wrong for cobblestones, but she was clearly past caring about practicality. Hair done like she'd come from somewhere important or was going somewhere that needed to believe she was. She had also, Gomer noticed, come alone. No Jaiwon, no friend, just her. Which meant this wasn't a social call. This was personal, and she'd come without witnesses on her own side because she was either very confident or very unwise, and Gomer was beginning to think it might be both. Gomer finished serving her current customers. Efficiently, warmly, with complete focus, because they had come to shop and they deserved her full attention regardless of whatever theater was assembling itself at the edge of her stall. She handed over the last bag, took the payment, sent the customer off with a genuine smile, and turned to Cha Yuri. Miss Cha, she said pleasantly, your mother's order is ready for pickup Thursday. I'm not here about the order, Yuri said. I figured. Gomer leaned against the back counter, crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, just settled. The posture of a woman who was comfortable in her space and intended to remain so. What can I do for you? Yuri looked at her for a moment. Assembling something. Gomer could see it happening, the careful selection, the calculated delivery. She recognized the process because she was good at it herself, and watching someone else do it was interesting in the way that watching a chess opponent consider a move was interesting. I think, Yuri said, keeping her voice low, intimate, the kind of volume that suggested this was just between them and not for the market's consumption, which was smart, Gomer acknowledged, because volume was its own kind of ammunition. That you're a clever woman. I know I am, Gomer said. But thank you. A flicker. Recovered fast. Then you understand what's happening here. Tell me what you think is happening. Seojin SSI has been coming to your stall. Yuri tilted her head. Frequently. And I think you're smart enough to know that a man like that doesn't just come for pork. Sure he does, Gomer said easily. My pork is exceptional. Gomer SSI. A little of the composure thinning at the edges. I've known Seojun for 2 years. Our families are what they are, Gomer said. I'm sure. He has a world, Yuri continued. A very specific world with very specific expectations. the people around him, the functions he attends, the... Let me stop you there, Gomer said. She said it quietly. She said it without heat. And somehow that was the thing that actually stopped Yuri, because she had come prepared for anger or defensiveness or embarrassment, and none of those things were present. Gomer unfolded her arms and moved to the front of her counter. Not toward Yuri, just upright, full height, taking up the space she was entitled to. I'm going to tell you what I see, she said. Because I think you came here expecting me to be scared of you, and I want to save us both some time. She kept her voice conversational. You're beautiful. Genuinely. I noticed that the first day. You have money and taste and you know how to walk into a room. Those are real things and they're yours and I'm not taking anything away from them. Yuri was very still. But you sent a compliance review to my stall, Gomer continued. Through a channel you thought I wouldn't trace back. And I want you to know I traced it back. I'm good at reading where things come from. A brief pause. And you showed up here today because the review found nothing, because there was nothing to find, and now you're standing in my office. She said it the same way she always said it, the same weight on the word. Trying to tell me about a man's world and its expectations. She tilted her head slightly. Baby, what world do you think I've been operating in for the last 6 years? Something crossed Yuri's face. Something more complicated than the polished surface she'd arrived with. I built this, Gomer said. And the simplicity of it was the most devastating version of the statement possible, because it wasn't a boast. It was a fact, and facts didn't need decoration. Every single piece of it. In a country that wasn't mine, in a language I had to earn, in a market where I was the only person who looked like me and everyone waited to see if I'd last 6 months. She gestured once at the stall, the gleaming case, the ordered knives, the burgundy apron, the heels. I lasted 6 years. And I will be here 6 years from now. She leaned forward slightly, both hands on the counter. So when you come in here to tell me about worlds and expectations, whose world do you think is small? The market had gone quiet around them in the particular way that markets went quiet when something real was happening. Not silent, the fish vendor was still calling, a child was still laughing somewhere down the row. But the immediate vicinity had achieved a focused hush. Yuri's jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright. She was holding herself together with the specific effort of a woman who had not been spoken to like this in a very long time, possibly ever, and didn't have a prepared response because she hadn't brought one. He's not interested in you, she said finally. Quiet. A last card. Gomer looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled. The real one, the corner one, the one that meant she'd already done the math. Then you have nothing to worry about, she said simply. Do you? Silence. Yuri picked up her bag, set her shoulders, and walked back through the market the way she'd come in. Spine straight, heels clicking, performing composure so hard it was almost a different kind of undignified. The market exhaled. Auntie Shin, from approximately 12 meters away, started clapping. Slowly. Once. Then twice. Then the fish vendor's wife joined. Then someone else. It was brief. It was a market. Not a theater, people had things to do. But it was genuine and warm, and Gomer looked at all of them with her hand over her face. Stop it, she said. That was beautiful, Auntie Shin announced. It was a business conversation, Gomer said. Go sell your vegetables. Seo Jun arrived 20 minutes later. He came around the corner at his usual pace, his usual posture, and then he read the energy of the stall and the surrounding area. Specifically the way Auntie Shin looked at him with the expression of someone bursting with news, and he stopped walking for a moment. He looked at Gomer. She looked at him. Then she pointed at him the same way she pointed at Auntie Shin, just with a different degree of force. You, she said. He approached slowly, with the caution of a man who has correctly identified that something has happened. What did I? Not what you did, she said. What you are. And what you being here keeps producing. She set her hands flat on the counter. I had a very interesting visitor today. He was quiet for a moment, reading her face. Are you all right? Seo Jun. She said his name like she was setting it down. I am always all right. That's not the point. What's the point? The point, she said evenly, is that I have a market to run. I have customers who depend on consistency, suppliers who depend on my reputation being clean, a license I earned and maintain and intend to keep. And you coming here, she paused, chose words. is making my market a location on someone else's map, and I don't want to be on that map. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to be. You don't have to ask. You just have to show up, and the map draws itself. She held his gaze. You need to stop coming. The words landed. She watched them land. He didn't move for a moment. Just stood there, and she could see him not calculating, not strategizing, just actually feeling something, and letting her see that he was, which was either brave or foolish, and she suspected it was both. Gomer, he said. I mean it, she said, not unkindly. She wasn't capable of unkind without cause, and he hadn't given her cause. But firmly, the way she meant everything she meant. This is my space, and I'm asking you to respect it. A long pause. All right, he said. He picked up nothing. He hadn't ordered yet. There was nothing to pick up. He just stood there one more moment with the bag he'd come in with from elsewhere in the market, looking at her in a way she was absolutely not going to examine until she was alone and the stall was closed and she had the luxury of examining things without an audience. Then he left. The market went about its business. Auntie Shin did not clap this time. She came to the counter quietly and stood beside Gomer without saying anything, which was the most emotionally intelligent thing she had done in their entire acquaintance. Gomer looked at the display case, straightened a cut that didn't need straightening. Don't, she said. I'm not saying anything, Auntie Shin said. Good. I'm just standing here. I know. A pause. He'll be back, Auntie Shin said, very gently. Gomer did not respond to this. She picked up her packaging tape. She made herself busy. She was very good at making herself busy. It was one of her most reliable skills. She stayed busy until closing. He did not come Monday. He did not come Wednesday. He did not come Friday. She did not think about this. She was busy. The compliance report came back clean, confirmed, documented, filed. A new restaurant reached out about a supplier contract. She rearranged her display case. She had a genuinely excellent Thursday that included a roasting battle with a delivery driver who had tried to park in a way that blocked half the market row and left absolutely defeated Anne. She suspected, planning to come back for pork on the weekend, because that was usually how those interactions ended. She did not think about Park Seo-joon. On the following Monday, a delivery arrived at her stall, not through her suppliers. A separate courier, private, unmarked uniform, the kind of delivery service that people used when they wanted things to be discreet. He set a box on her counter and left before she could ask questions. She opened it carefully. Inside, a pair of burgundy leatherwork gloves, the good kind, the kind made for actual use rather than aesthetics, lined and cut precisely for a person who worked with their hands in all weather. Folded beneath them, a card. No name, just, your hands work too hard to be cold. A regular customer. She sat with the box for a long moment. She put the gloves on. They fit perfectly, which meant he had paid attention to her hands at some point, which was its own entire problem that she was going to have to deal with later. She wore them for the rest of the day. Auntie Shin saw them at noon and said nothing. But she smiled for approximately 4 hours straight, which said everything. The gifts were not aggressive. That was the thing. He didn't send flowers, which would have been a statement, a pressure. He didn't send anything that required a response or created an obligation. What arrived over the following 2 weeks was a jar of a specific Guyanese pepper sauce she hadn't been able to find in Seoul and had mentioned once, casually, in a conversation she hadn't thought he was paying that much attention to. A small wooden carving of a market stall, the kind of thing you found at artisan shops, no note. A bag of coffee from a roaster she'd mentioned passing on her way to work, with a receipt tucked in so she could find them again. They meant. She knew what the man delivering them, in the most oblique, patient, most infuriating way possible, was saying. She also knew what she felt about it, and the feeling wasn't simple, and she was a woman who had learned to be careful with feelings that weren't simple. But she put the pepper sauce on her shelf where she could see it. She set the little carving on the corner of her counter where it caught the light. She used the coffee information to find the roaster and went on a Saturday morning before the market opened. And on the third week, when she arrived at her stall on a Monday morning and found Park Seo-joon leaning against the wall beside the entrance with 2 cups of coffee from the roaster she'd only visited twice. Both cups, same order. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, not expectant. Not performing patience, just present, the way he'd been present from the very beginning. with the particular, unhurried certainty of a man who had decided something and was comfortable waiting for the world to catch up. "You found the roaster," she said. "You gave me the receipt," he said. "Technically, I gave you information. That's not the same as an invitation." "You're right," he said and held out the cup. "This is the invitation." She looked at the cup. She looked at him. "You are so much trouble," she said. Not like it was a complaint. More like a woman noting the weather. "Probably," he said. She took the cup. She unlocked her stall. He helped her set up the display case, not taking over, not directing, just picking up the clear logical next task and doing it. And she let him because he did it right without being told how, which was the most revealing thing about a person that existed. Auntie Shin arrived at her stall at 7:15, looked at the scene, pressed both hands to her face, and turned immediately to her vegetables before Gomer could point. By 10 o'clock, the market had reached its verdict collectively. And without a vote, Park Seo-joon was, effective immediately, one of theirs. He didn't know it yet, but the fish vendor had already saved him a good cut. Auntie Shin had already added him to her mental roster of people she would feed without asking, and the Tiok vendor had already started having extra samples ready for when he walked past. That was how the market worked. It adopted people slowly and then all at once, and once it decided, there was no going back. Gomer watched Seo-joon help old Mr. Beck from the grain stall carry a heavy sack to the storage area. Seo-joon had just noticed and done it without being asked, without making it a moment, and Mr. Beck had patted his arm like he was someone's grandson, and she felt something warm and inconvenient settle in the middle of her chest. She turned back to her counter. She had pork to dress and orders to fill and a business to run. But she was smiling. The real one. The whole one, not just the corner. And for once, she let it stay.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that when you build with integrity and refuse to shrink, the right things find you and the wrong things reveal themselves. What you build with your hands, no connection can defeat. Strength and warmth live in the same woman. The right person honors your work before your heart. You are never in competition, just a different league. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.